Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back with some video game news for Monday, December 16th. And hey, the subscribe button even works now. My computer reboot, so maybe just relaunching OBS because of the computer rebooting fixed everything. I had a funny thought as I was about to start streaming today. Here we can see Marvel Rivals going very strong. And mostly I'm not hearing a lot of complaints other than it seems like there is just what seems to be an attacker class that most people want to play in Marvel Rivals, and a healer class which nobody wants to play in Marvel Rivals. So there's perhaps a broken system there in which you need to force the player base to play different character classes and cycle through them. It is kind of surprising, and I will say I'm not really speaking from experience here since I don't play these kinds of games, but it is kind of surprising that by default all games don't launch with a system in which you have to pick one of the 5 character classes if it is one of those kinds of games. And if you get to play as the attacker class once, you're going to have to play as the other 4 classes once before you get to play as the attacker again, just to keep things balanced. Because inherently, the idea of just everybody maining or only playing certain classes is undoubtedly hurting the balance of any kind of player versus player, or even player versus NPC and player versus event game terribly. Perhaps there is a future in which you could just say no character classes at all and have healing abilities built into every character. For Marvel superheroes, that's not the worst thought, since Marvel would be the Spider-Man universe and the X-Men universe, and so it's not that crazy to say every single Marvel character tends to have a healing factor of some sort, and thus they would just not really need a healer class. And if you think about like all the Marvel superheroes, it's not like there are any healer superheroes in the Marvel universe that are recognizable and known. Maybe Night Nurse is about the best known healer character in the Marvel universe that I can think of, and I just mentioned a incredibly obscure Daredevil character to mention Night Nurse, and I might be making all of that up too since I don't really know. So yeah, that's the main complaint so far that I'm hearing with Marvel Rivals, and clearly it's not hurting the player base. Marvel Rivals launched pretty much at the perfect time as a free-to-play game, considering everybody's broke and it's Christmas and it's just past that Black Friday in which anybody would buy games for themselves and be playing them. There might be new games under the Christmas tree in disc-based form, but that really wouldn't even affect Steam too much. I would think most kids would be fairly poorly treated if they were given Steam gift cards under the Christmas tree. Although that's not the worst thought ever, it's also inherently assuming that the kids can only play video games then from December 25th to about January 1st before they have to go back to school. Meanwhile, they've probably been fairly off of school or been really lazy and just not really done much at school for the past 3 weeks, really. Yeah, and that's something that struck me when I was a kid many years ago, as far as there was a lot of nonsense Christmas stuff that I was drug around, like stuff that I wasn't particularly happy to do, stuff I never really would want to do, like Christmas concerts, looking at Christmas lights being hung up, probably 3 or 4 Christmas concerts It felt like every year not being able to watch the TV shows I'd want to watch because everything was off, and it would all either be Christmas movies on TV. Like, Christmas really every year ruined my schedule as far as what I actually wanted to do, and video games were about the only retreat where you had that control to say, hey, at least I can play my old video games. And yeah, I was never given like particularly new video games on Black Friday or anything to be able to play during that whole time. And so yeah, I was very much a Scrooge after a while, and still, for the same reasons, don't really appreciate how all of society, particularly in the United States, just shifts into this completely foreign, completely different schedule, activities. It's like you just went through a wormhole and went to a completely different world. And I know it's probably not anywhere as bad nowadays, now that everybody has the ability to do anything. Streaming TV fixes a lot of that nonsense. Certainly, if I want to watch a horror movie now, I can do that year round, whereas if I wanted to watch a horror movie in a good format earlier, you basically had to do that around October. And then the only other really catch-up thing here, because yeah, I'm still doing a very poor job of just cleaning house. Like, sometimes I'll accomplish a little bit, but you know, weeks and weeks are going by, it feels like now, and I really don't feel like I'm doing as much as any normal human being would do. And that I do think that a average person would look at what needs to be done and underestimate it severely and think it would only take maybe a day or two, and then they would end up spending a week on it, but then they would have been done in a week. Whereas I perhaps overestimated how long it's going to take, but still I'm fairly accurate in how much I'm actually accomplishing. A big part of that certainly is because I'm watching way too many TV, Rising of the Shield Hero animes on Hulu, and way too many movies on Amazon Prime. I watched that movie Hundreds of Beavers, which is this live action black and white, mostly silent film that is, I think, supposed to be a lot of throwbacks to Looney Tunes, but honestly it's a little bit not family friendly, because there's a lot of killing of beavers in somewhat horrific and gruesome ways. And even the title is definitely supposed to be tricky and provocative when there really isn't that much there. It's a movie I would say, if you are a fan of movies, worth watching once, but if you're not a fan of weird, more indie movies, don't bother watching, and I wouldn't say you really need to watch it a second time. It goes on way too long, frankly. It really should have been about half of its length, and then it would maybe have hit a better sweet spot. I saw Hulu has a movie that just came out where it's supposed to be Christmas in August, and it's kind of a shame that a movie like that still has to be released in Christmas in December instead of being released in August. It has Danny DeVito and I believe his granddaughter, so I could see why specifically he would have gone for this. And Danny DeVito's actual granddaughter, I think, is playing in it, and the parents are splitting up, and the granddaughter demands one more Christmas together, and he's going to give it to him even if it's in August, which is a interesting twist. I also watched a movie, and now this really has just become movie time, but instead of video game news at the beginning of the warm-up section here, where it was a group of friends are at the wedding, and then the Christian biblical revelations happens, and they get left behind. It wasn't part of the Left Behind series, but it's general same thought. And while that premise could be interesting, it's they didn't do anything with it. There was a comedy movie that did about the same thing with a bunch of comedic actors, and at least in that, it was famous celebrities that you would assume wouldn't be raptured getting left behind. And so the joke was that they were scumbags and that they deserved to be left behind. But in both movies, it's really just this horrifically gory, violent monster movie with no real resolution, because you can't really fight the biblical revelations, and if you're playing it according to the Bible, like you can't say, oh, they figured out how to use salt and iron, and then they became the Winchesters and fighting revelations like in Supernatural, which even Supernatural took, I think, at least 8 or 9 seasons before they actually were fighting some kind of revelations like Apocalypse. But yeah, I can't even remember the name of the movie I watched, and it's just pointless. It's just like the people that seemed like they realized that they should be Christians got horrifically killed in the revelation after the first wave took all the believers who already believed, and those who didn't turn to Christianity got horrifically killed. Like, so you get horrifically killed either way. Yeah, which is not a particularly good premise. And personally, I just don't think people should read Revelations or watch movies based on Revelations in the first place. I don't think people should worry about it. Worry about the rest of the books of the Bible and what that says. I find that people who obsess about Revelations in particular tend to be the craziest of the craziest of fanatics. And I probably watched some other movies and did some other things. I've been watching a lot of YouTube also as far as kitchen organization, and there's definitely some things that I've been doing wrong as far as how my kitchen is organized. And now just taking a breath and saying, hey, let's redo this. Let's put the dishes we use the most right next to the dishwasher. So you can just pull them right out of the dishwasher and put them on the cabinet, in the shelves, in the drawers, right next to it. Trying to give everything a good clean, even though I'm probably not succeeding particularly well there. And hiring a cleaner to clean after I clean still probably would make sense. But yeah, I'm watching kitchen organization things and just trying to figure out, where do I want to put a paper towel holder? Where do I want to put a garbage dispenser? Do I have room for those kinds of things or not? Can I get as much as possible off the surfaces of the counters? Can I leave things on the surfaces if they're actually useful or if they actually look good? But yeah, I'm definitely moving a lot of furniture around, and I have like 2 pieces of furniture just don't fit in the house at all. They're these weird little corner pieces that are triangles, half squares, and yeah, there's just no good looking location for them, because you basically have to have a room that has two corners that need that, and it just isn't such a thing. Or you would need a third piece of furniture that is the exact same depth as these corner pieces, which even then it wouldn't look particularly good. And in a lot of ways they're pieces of furniture that are designed to only hold curios, because they're triangular, so they're not particularly good for holding anything square, anything round. They're only really good for holding really small individual items or triangular items, which you're not likely going to have a lot of anyways. Yeah. I also have the equipment, most of the equipment, to remodel bathrooms, and I'm probably not going to get around to that as fast as I would like. Anyways, let's get back on track. I also want to say I am somewhat disappointed in just the same old aftermath of the Game Awards and just the general conversation I'm seeing on Reddit. Now, I fully have to admit, I wouldn't be surprised if 99.9% of everything I see on Reddit is done by bots or sponsored people trying to do ads, trolls, whatever. But I think definitely this is a conversation that I've seen on Reddit that is getting pushed and fed still by a lot of game publishing companies or game developers, in that they are still kind of pushing this, oh, we're hurting the man baby's feelings and hurting the toxic masculinity of gamers by having Siri be the main protagonist in Witcher 4, which my opinion is stronger than ever, in that my biggest complaint about the trailer on Witcher 4 is that it's not really showing any gameplay footage, and there is just that danger that they're showing us a cutscene that will not look anything like what the actual gameplay of The Witcher 4 looks like once we get to that point. Siri probably will be the protagonist. I don't think they're going to do a bait and switch or anything like that, but I really couldn't care less who the protagonist is compared to actually wanting the game to look and play good when it actually comes out. Then they are combining what looks like either a very small number of people actually complaining about Siri either looking ugly, or these arguments keep on coming up, and I don't know if they're real arguments at this point or masculine, and complaints about it being Siri in general. Definitely nobody is echoing or repeating the sentiment that maybe some people, I think legitimate people, would have preferred a custom character creator in Witcher 4. It would have been a great point to do that, in that you can just have a whole new Witcher and a whole new clan and make your own custom characters. And then you could have Siri be the bridging arc to that. Also, that allows for some of that. And yeah, while I can't attribute any of the actions and comments on Reddit about Witcher 4 directly to the creators, I can attribute the tone and the visual of the cutscene that was shown. And that definitely was a very much female-centric trailer, in that you have a female victim being rescued by a female Witcher, hating and blaming the masculine run community that was sacrificing the female victim. And then the other game with the bald lady, I mean, there's just nothing to know about that at all. So, yeah, it's a bald lady. Whatever. Yeah, well, we'll see how that goes. I feel like that is getting merged together, too. Although it is fair to point out that just so little was even really announced at the Game Awards to be that amazing that people are even talking about it the next day. Inherently, this is a problem with the Game Awards, and I think every year we need to probably come out and throw this complaint out as the true problem of the Game Awards, which is the same true problem that E3 had in its last years, is that there are just too many games being announced too close. And it seemed like maybe COVID pushed some of the companies to really start to admit that and start to have directs and start to show only 4 or 5 games in a direct instead of 20 to 50 announcements. Because Jeff Keighley, I think in particular, he just wants a bigger number. And so every year I imagine he's just going to try and keep on pushing the amount of announcements to go higher and higher. But already it is just this big ball of goo in my mind as far as every single other trailer. I can't name a single game except for Witcher 4 in my mind, and I can't remember any of the trailers. And that's why I've mostly given up on even bothering to watch these kinds of events, is because it's just so incredibly overwhelming. How can you get enthusiastic about anything when it's so ADHD? And so while I am upset with the one narrative that does seem to be happening and getting talked about the most on Reddit, the truth of it is that it's no surprise people aren't talking about any of the other trailers or games, is because I imagine most people don't even remember what they were. Like, if you put a list of all the announcements from the Game Awards in front of me, I don't think I would remember most of the games or recognize them. Also, a bit of a controversy I think they're trying to stir up, in that the Black Myth Wukong director said he wrote his acceptance speech 2 years ago, and that he expected to win Game of the Year, and he didn't. I think there is probably an argument that Black Myth Wukong should have won Game of the Year, but I don't think it's such an amazing blowout guarantee that every single person is going to agree to that. And inherently, this has always been the issue, is that Western games journalists, which make up the judges pool of the Game Awards, always give lower scores and lower acclaim to Japanese, or in this case Chinese, made development games. I guess it hasn't always been that case, because there just haven't really been Chinese AAA games made up until this point, but it's always been very much a anti-Asian sentiment. And perhaps this will encourage someone in China to make their own Game Awards and give Black Myth Wukong more acclaim that way. And frankly, a little bit of competition against the Game Awards would probably be a good thing. Still on my chart here, which we've been sitting on for way too long, don't feel like we've seen too much of a change, although it does seem like Deadlock is just going to fall lower and lower. As far as Steam's awards, yeah, let's just go ahead and open this again. These Steam Awards, I assume, are going to happen during one more sale of Steam. Yeah. And, yeah, I guess Okami makes some sense to buy right now because they announced a new Okami. Of course, it doesn't make any sense. How did Golem even get to mixed reviews? Maybe they found enough of a price point difference, or maybe they fixed it and nobody ever went back to mention that. But yeah, this is like a great example of what your Christmas is going to be, or what my Christmas could have been when I was younger, is that you get maybe a publisher sale right now to buy games, but you're not going to have a big Christmas sale quite yet to buy a new game and play it, nor are you really going to have anything that is too amazingly new. Yeah, although notice how flippant we really all are in that Indiana Jones is just come and gone from the conversation, which is Indiana Jones is probably the game to play. That being said, it is also noticeably a game that was not winning the Game Awards because it was just too late to the party, I would assume, more than anything. Night Shift Nurses? No, there was a hentai porno by that name that may very well have been based off a visual novel. I don't know if that's the visual novel though, or if this is just going in circles. It is interesting that we still have popular upcoming and big sellers that often are just adult games or visual novels. Which that is certainly something I would personally like to see. I'd like to see people try to address. It'd be nice if there was an adult game awards show also. It would have to be its own separate show, I'm sure. So show me the graph. High amount of positivity, high amount of negativity. This is 2 positive. This is only 3 positive. Okay, so I don't know how this really ended up getting mixed. This is an interesting element that might just be the case of if there's a bunch of jokey positive reviews at the beginning, that may just offset a lot of negative ones. Let's see, 91, if all of those were jokes, and this really should be 100% negative, which is an extreme if. And then if you just occasionally got a joke update here and there, then you could get to 53%. Although inherently people inherently 50% is not anywhere high enough for people to really want to review that. And I wonder if the Steam Awards maybe have people jokingly reviewing the game positively. 53% in the last 30 days, 41% overall. Yeah, the idea that mixed, though, is 50%, well, an accurate description, definitely also just feels weird. So yeah. Knowing who won, let's just go down this list real quick again as far as announcements. And yeah, I know in the last stream when we talked about it, I talked about Torque Origins and Split Fiction and Dispatch. And I think I mentioned Onimusha and talked about Stage Fright and Rematch, Crimson Desert. Yeah, and we talked about Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, which at this point, that would be the 5th time a Last of Us game has been released. Crimson Desert is the only male protagonist new game, really, that looks like it's... He doesn't look particularly interesting either. Although I guess Turok 3-way co-op goes in a different direction. I would say none of the characters in Turok Origins look like any of the characters in the previous Turok games, which makes perfect sense. We talked about Dying Light the Beast, Mafia the Old Country, Outer Worlds 2. Yeah. There is a massive amount of games that were talked about during the Game Awards, and I've forgotten them all in just over the course of a weekend. Multiversus was nominated, didn't go anywhere, which speaks poorly for Multiversus, I think. Yeah, and I don't think there's really anything else to even say. It's just crazy. It's really, really crazy to me that the Game Awards is effectively just a big ball of nothing. It's just cotton candy. Something bright and colorful and sugary, and the second you put any moisture into it, it just dissolves into nothing. And certainly if I was running a Game Award show, I'd want more impact than that. I think people talk about the Emmys and things that are Emmy nominated throughout the course of a year at least, whereas the Game Awards doesn't have enough impact to even matter a week later. That is certainly a sad state that it is starting in. Maybe it will grow eventually, but yeah. Moving on to video games. Video Games Chronicle.com news. The Unpacking developer challenges Nintendo to crack down on cheap fakes on eShop. Nintendo called out for apparent inaction over egregious scams on the online store. Now, what do they mean by egregious scams is the question. Do they mean the developers of Unpacking hate that somebody took their simplistic concept of a game, which I assume is just unpacking and decorating a room, and made yet another game that uses that simplistic, probably not trademarkable or copyrightable concept to do the same thing? Or are they talking about games that actually are scams in the sense that they're trying to get more money out of you for very little? Even in that, I guess technically a scam would be to get money out of you for giving you nothing, whereas technically being a bad deal legally is not considered legally a scam. Well, the actual information here does seem like they claim to have a valid trademark for the word unpacking. Now, I would argue that unpacking should not be trademarkable, but yeah, it does seem to me like there are games called Unpacking, Unpacking Universe Dreams, Unpacking Deluxe Edition, Unpacking Chill Music Pack. Yeah, suffice it to say, the sentiment is accurate, though, that Nintendo has been incredibly lazy as far as just allowing absolute garbage. I don't know if Steam is deserving of much praise, really, because there's definitely things that maybe don't have the exact same name but try to have name confusion, so they have something somewhat similar that somebody out not in the know or somebody without a keen eye might accidentally buy those games. There's plenty of games that take the same concepts and have different names. Unpacking being a simplistic game to parody or clone. Game clones have been a thing for decades, but I'm not sure they've ever really helped the video game industry in any way. They almost certainly have hurt the game industry. Doom clones. Although inherently, a lot of games that were called Doom clones back in the day now have enough of a followership and enough nostalgia around them that people are happy they exist. But yeah, I imagine we will not see any improvement at all on the eShop for the next Nintendo console, though. I imagine Nintendo's going to do very little as far as curating the storefront. They spend all of their legal money and all of their time and effort suing pirates. They have no qualms about clones being on their storefront. Now, I suppose if somebody really wanted to test Nintendo, they would pirate somebody else's game and put it on the eShop and see what Nintendo did, but I imagine Nintendo probably would take that down if they say pirated something that was like Halo 1 and put that on their storefront. They'd probably take that down. But yeah, having Unpacking as your main title just really highlights how, even if you were legally in the right by trademarking Unpacking it for the name of a game, you've just not been creative enough, and so it doesn't feel like that trademark should be valid if it was. And that's really one of those cases where you just put your developer's name in front of it, and we never see anybody really do that, where it's like Redfin Software's Unpacking. That's just a made-up company name, but if you had done that, or Unpacking from Redfin Software just in the title, then you would have a much better argument about uniqueness. Let's see, moving on. Sorry, I'm adjusting my headphones. Sonic 3's post-credit scene has seemingly leaked, which I couldn't really care less personally, since I haven't seen any of the Sonic movies, nor am I particularly too interested. I do know that the Five Nights at Freddy's movie is about to leave Amazon Prime Video, so I might watch that. I know Secret Level has its first episode, I imagine, out, and so I probably should watch that just to try to stay in the know, but in reality, there is just not a lot of reason to watch TV or movies based off of video games. They don't ever really loop back or connect in any way to matter. I'm still also, as far as other things, I'm killing time with playing the Pokemon TCG Pocket game, which both events have ended right now. So today in particular probably be less necessary to play. I did finally get 5 consecutive wins in the most recent event. That was an awful setup, and I don't feel like they're really learning anything, and so I imagine they are just going to give yet another event that is going to be somewhat similar, but they're not overlapping the events either, so that's clearly a mistake. There should always be some event going on. I did find out that some of the highest rarities, maybe not the absolute highest, but some of the highest of rarities of cards can be traded under the Flare collection screen, which is hidden deep in the menus. You can trade extra of those cards for special tickets, which is only one of 3 or 4 different currencies in the game. So there is a way to get special tickets to get the special items. There's still, however, not a way to get the purchase only currency to get some of the other items, and it's very difficult to close to impossible to get gold. And yeah, there's just way too many currencies in the game. And I would say, as far as Pokemon TCG in general, I do think I'm playing Pocket is a sped up version of the game, which probably helps, but I don't think there's really a balance there. It definitely does not feel like there are certain kinds of decks that can win. In particular, I spent a lot of time over the weekend trying to make a green deck using leaf Pokemon, and yeah, there just aren't the right cards to synergize correctly that you would have a deck there that consistently wins. In fact, I think there really are only 2 or 3 decks right now that consistently wins. Now they are going to come out with a new expansion. Maybe with new expansion they'll come out with some new cards, but I kind of feel like Pokemon TCG may never have really been balanced, and they may very well have never cared to balance it. But yeah, I suppose if they started putting out next generation Pokemon, the ones I would recognize even less, there might be a balance there. I spent a lot of times trying to play Dratini, which uses both water and electric energy, which would mean you would have to make a water and energy deck, and there's just no way to win that way. You have to have decks that are either colorless or focused exclusively on one deck in Pocket. Maybe in the original version of the game of Pokemon TCG, where it was longer, you might be able to pull something off like that, but no. There is a way in which you could get very lucky and get a one-turn kill, I found, but you would have to get very lucky. It's very much just coin flip based. There's no way of improving your odds there. And yeah, so the actual act of deck building or trying a different strategy just falls apart flat in Pokemon TCG Pocket at the moment, because the game is too simplistic. It's just not Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, it's not even like Generation 1 Yu-Gi-Oh! Where maybe there was only a few hundred cards, but still they would kind of synergize and morph and polymerize into new characters. There's just not that at all. In fact, there's really only about 5 spell cards in Pokemon, and they don't do that much. And then the rest of the Pokemon have just like one attack, and sometimes those attacks have an effect, but those effects tend to be the same thing. It puts a Pokemon to sleep, it paralyzes them, which is exactly the same as putting them to sleep, or it poisons them, which is different than putting them to sleep, but not really any better. So yeah, I think I will probably start to run out of momentum playing Pokemon Pocket once I start finding other things to do with my time, particularly if I started to get back to making footage. I'm also noticing that a lot of my YouTube shorts are coming out with the wrong titles, and I wonder if my new macro is just doing something completely out of order, or if I just messed up a lot of videos previously. I'm also getting a ton of spam on YouTube, and I am just rambling here. We were supposed to be going through the news, and see, this is a great point. If at 44 minutes in I saw a drop off of viewership because I started rambling again, I'd be like, okay, I deserve that, I rambled. But inherently, I'm getting like 30 seconds of watch time at the beginning, and one assumes it's at the beginning, and that's it. So almost wonder, and I don't know if I said this, that I had this funny thought. I almost wonder if I should do the opposite and just start cussing at the very beginning of the videos. Do the exact opposite that YouTube suggests, just to get people's attention. I wouldn't do that, obviously, but I do kind of wonder. Just do the opposite. Just try something different. Anything at all. Let's see. Witcher 3 veterans Rebel Wolves will reveal their new game next month. So this is an interesting strategy to certainly think about. First of all, you're getting a game reveal in January, which means very little competition. So I think there's a good strategy there to see if it works. It may work, it may not. It may effectively create a lack of hype that you're trying to create, because you want to probably set expectations to be smaller than what people would expect from people who worked on Witcher 3. Also, this allows them to make an announcement outside of the Witcher 4 announcement. Of course, Witcher 4 could just put out a new trailer or announcement in January to try and spoil that. This may very well be a Callisto Protocol scenario where the CD Projekt Red just tries at every effort to crush any hype around Rebel Wolves' new game. Inherently, you would hope that Rebel Wolves doesn't go down the route of Callisto Protocol and just try to make something that looks like Witcher. And I hope we don't have them just announce a male protagonist game and then the entire conversation just devolves down to a bunch of trolls going, I'm going to play this game because it's got a male protagonist, not Witcher 4 because of Ciri being the protagonist. It's the game and art director, which inherently I don't really feel like there's a lot of faith you can put into the directors of games as far as what the final output will be. Dark fantasy narrative sandbox action RPG sounds like Witcher 3. We shall see. Yeah, here's the micro drama. The Black Myth Wukong director reportedly expresses disappointment over Game Awards snub. He claims he wrote the Game Awards victory speech 2 years ago, so inherently he assumed he was going to succeed. It's almost, it's very in line in my understanding on the way Chinese works. Chinese people think and act and do business, though, in that it is in that you do have very much a kind of cutthroat, aggressive style in which if you feel you're wronged, you come out and attack somewhat more than you would in a Western way of doing business. And you have perhaps just a general assumption that you're going to be treated and honored more than perhaps you deserve to. Because let's face it, well, even the Chinese players are not still playing Black Myth Wukong. Now I can certainly relate to not really understanding the selection criteria, and certainly how this is said in Chinese may be different. But yeah, it may be a saving face thing too, to say, hey, we didn't do anything wrong. I'm not taking the blame because I didn't win the Video Game Award Game of the Year. So let's attack the foreigners, which definitely would be a Chinese thing. And frankly, it's just a general thing that's done in every country, is blame the foreigners for for a lack of perfect success. Yeah. I can't help but wonder, had Black Myth Wukong launched an update or some DLC or even a for-your consideration campaign, they very well may have won Game of the Year. And they do have a valid argument that compared to Astrobot, they should be considered. And I imagine Sony straight up did have a for-your consideration campaign and did put out a update somewhat close to when the Game Award judges were considering the game. And I can't help but realize that Sony is a Japanese company and Black Myth Wukong is a Chinese game, so yeah, it definitely hurts more to be beaten by a Japanese company, I'm sure. But then I can also put some very valid criticisms around Chinese games and inherently Black Myth Wukong just perpetuating the problem with Chinese games, and that they always try to go with the same way too traditional Chinese themes, and that's the only real way they're getting approved past the censorship boards in China. And so telling the Monkey King story yet again for the millionth time, even if you're doing it well, is just not as interesting as telling a brand new story like Astrobot is. Ciri has also apparently been recast in Witcher 4. Ciara Berkeley has been cast as Ciri, replacing the character's previous actor. Which she is older, so if you're going to have an age gap in general, it would make some sense to perhaps have a different voice actor that you could pay less money for. It is probably worth pointing out that even in this screenshot, there is at least one female presenting character in the background, so it wasn't just a full mob of men sacrificing the lady. And yeah, there was the whole father that really was reluctantly sacrificing his daughter and didn't really want to go on. So it isn't like they 100% had all men are bad messaging. Just most men in that group. Let's see. Sega doing what seems to be a fairly standard Japanese thing for the flailing previous generation game development companies, saying Sonic Superstars is a disappointment. Expectations are way too high. I think in particular around Sonic, there is inherently, I think, just a disconnect between a fandom that likes Sonic as a character for keychains and figures and plushies and even live action movies, versus Sonic as a good mascot in a good game series. And so the pattern continues in that at least half of all Sonic games seem to be disappointments to Sega, at the very least, and about half of them are disappointments to the player base in general. People have certainly gone into deep dives onto just why Sonic as a game does not work, and Sega hasn't really listened or made those kinds of changes that need to be made permanent. Inherently, any game where the character is in the center of the screen and enemies are coming from this screen and you're encouraged to run directly in this direction is a dumb concept. You're going to run into spikes, you're going to run into enemies and die. Even if you move Sonic to always be at the back, that's only just giving you a few more seconds that you reduce as you go faster and faster. Otherwise, this is 2D platforming, but losing all of the challenge of 2D platforming, or most of it at least, in that you have to slow down to make most jumps. And generally in 2D platform, every jump is something that's somewhat of a challenge, where most Sonic games, large swaths of the map are designed to just be run through, so you're wasting a lot of development time around all of that. So yeah, Sega really needed to just break Sonic's legs. I mean, as crazy as it is, just canonically in one game, break a foot, break a leg, make it so he can no longer run. Make that his hero arc and hero redemption arc of the Sonic universe. And when he comes out from that arc, you don't ever heal his foot or heal his leg, and you make him be slow for the rest of his life, and you make him be a hero despite that. Yeah. Then you can have a completely different style of game. Then you can have the Mario games, as it were. Mario Odyssey, things like that. Then you can have real ambitions. This there. Plus, even if you weren't going to do that, just compare Nintendo with Mario and Sega with Sonic, and you will know this, that Nintendo has just been way more willing to experiment with different playstyles and different concepts than they have with Sonic. It is shocking that nobody thought to make a Sonic RPG game like Mario All-Stars, and they still have yet to do that. It's shocking that they haven't tried to have a Captain Toad's spin-off game with Sonic's friend Miles, for instance. It is crazy that really the last time they really experimented was either the successful 3D game that still has Sonic mostly running and collecting rings, or Sonic Spinball decades previous. But yeah, Sega is mishandling Sonic terribly, because Sega is a bad company that really only wanted to make money for decades there based on arcade machines. And so their entire concept of making video games was centered around having arcades. Now that the Sega arcades, I don't believe exist at all in Japan, and arcades are effectively dead, they are floundering. Let's see, moving on. Elden Ring's Night Reigns beta test is coming in February. So, more Elden Ring. Yeah. I suppose Elden Ring is a good contrast to Black Myth Wukong, in that the director of Elden Ring's DLC could have, had the exact same sentiment that they deserved to be the winner of Game of the Year, and yet Elden Ring not doing that, because they probably understand that the way to get the mainstream video game journalists to vote for you next year is to stay on their good side, not attack them publicly, even if it's on Weeaboo or Weibo. Not Weeaboo, that's different, that's a Japanese word. Although I'm not sure it actually is a Japanese word. Capcom says it's working on reactivating other dormant IPs like Onimusha and Akami, which we've gotten some updates since then, so it's kind of older info. Yeah. Although it does definitely feel like it's just a circle where game companies often get desperate and they try to reactivate old IPs to get a small bit of sales, and then those small bit of sales aren't big enough when compared to the best of the best AAA games that got released that year, and then they just don't do anything more. Nobody is really seemingly willing to commit to it and say we're just going to make a Dino Crisis series at a lower budget, a smaller budget every couple of years, every 4 or 5 years, and we're going to release that and we're going to hope it sells well, but we know it's not going to make billions of dollars for us, but it will help maintain our lineup and fill in the gaps of when we don't have other games to release. And it will get a different audience, potentially, from your average audience. Dbrand has posted what it claims to be an image of the Switch 2 inside its latest case. Quote, yes, we will not be answering any questions. Well, first of all, I'll say their case doesn't look particularly lined up perfectly to whatever is inside this, whether this is a 3D printed mock-up of what the Switch 2 is going to be or what. It, to me, seems like there's a bend here. It definitely feels like there's a bend here, which that seems like that would be in the wrong place, because then that would set the screen back further. I don't know why you would want that, because if it's a touchscreen, which one would assume it is, putting your thumb here and then stretching past a indent, setting it even an inch back, would just mean it would be even more difficult to even touch this part of the screen. And looking at the resolution and the size here, if this is a touch screen and this is the right size, you're never going to be able to get to the center or the other side of the screen from holding it on the edge. You're going to have to hold it on one side and let go and touch the screen if there's any touchscreen interactivity. Although, in fairness, I don't think the Switch ever really embraced touchscreen inputs while gaming either. They really only had it there for the menus, so perhaps there's just not going to be a touchscreen on it. That would save you only maybe $20 though. And then this outline here implies where the screen is. Maybe I'm misunderstanding this, and maybe this is empty space here, and so you just have a Joy-Con floating and a Joy-Con floating and a screen in the middle, which I kind of question that. Now, if these Joy-Cons were facing the wrong direction and there was a edge here to grip the screen better, that kind of would make some sense. But I've already spoken too long about a generic looking case with something inside of it. If this is what the next Nintendo console looks like, well, then I won't be particularly surprised by it. I would be kind of interested to see if they drop the red-blue visual effects for the initial launch product, or if they double down on that. I'd be kind of interested to see if the Joy-Cons are actually going to be detachable. One assumes that they are from the patents and the magnetic locking system they've talked about. Yeah, this is not in any way a change from the layout of where the buttons are. It might be that the Joy-Cons are bigger and will fit adult hands better, but it's not going to be a controller that I would expect too much from, as far as comparing that to like the Steam Deck controller and its touchpads, or just a PlayStation 5 controller or an Xbox Series X controller. Let's see. Epic Games and Good Old Games announced their latest free PC games. I think we may have already covered this. It's still very weird, though, to have Video Games Chronicle merge those two announcements together as one. First, Berserker Kazan notably didn't have a new trailer or an old trailer even to show at the Game Awards, as far as I recall. It's getting released March 2025. That may be a game that comes and goes with less fanfare than it deserves, just because it's not really promoting itself well enough. That's going to bring us to the Gematsu articles, which now, just a few days after the Game Awards, I wouldn't be surprised if we are just going to have a whole new collection of games being announced that are going to continue to push my mind in the direction of forgetting everything that was shown at the Game Awards. A anime-inspired racing game called Neon Apex Beyond the Limit has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. We'll say this animation still here. Not particularly a high quality level of animation. Same there. Now, I suppose inherently in a racing game, you don't have to have the animation of the characters be particularly that good, since you're not going to be looking at them that much. The problem with racing games is, for the most part, most people would want to play one or two per year, and way more than one or two are being made per year. While they all try to differentiate themselves, none of the gimmicks have really impacted the amount of desire there is out there. That was very flashy. That is one of the things I also should complain about as far as Hulu and Shield Hero, Rising of the Shield Hero. Ever since Season 2, they started to darken the screen, just darken every pixel of the screen quite a bit every time there's a flashy attack happening. I can't help but assume that at some point somebody figured out that they were going to cause seizures with the flashy, low effort kind of CG lightning bolt type attacks, and they just overcompensated way too much. Unless that's something that Hulu is doing, and if it's something that Hulu is doing, that's really annoying, and I'd like to be able to turn that off. But yeah, it is very obvious that you'll see not only the screen darken, you'll often see the frame rate drop. And yes, I don't want myself or anyone else to have seizures, but plenty of other anime series figured out how to do that without making the screen look awful. And that kind of kills the whole part of it being an action anime at that point, is if you know after the second season every attack is going to be awful looking. It's crazy they've gotten to a third season too, and they basically changed the focus too, where they're off doing side quests versus fighting the waves, which is what they were supposed to be doing in the first place. Moving on, Gematsu says Stellar Blade's quote holiday update launches December 17th. They're putting out a Christmas update of some sort, and the screenshots are not showing. View the screenshots at the gallery. All my screenshots are out of order here. How are we supposed to do this? So the update seems to be decorating certain areas with Christmas things. I don't think South Korea is particularly like anti-Christmas or anything. I think they kind of rather enjoy it from the Korean live action shows I've seen, so this seems in line. a lot politically happening around Korea right now, that the president seems to be on his way out. With the prime minister, I believe, is in charge right now, and then the courts and the judges in Korea are going to decide to probably get rid of the president, but they may decide to get rid of the prime minister too. So yeah, a lot of weirdness going on, none of which I imagine would immediately affect Stellar Blade, which probably had these outfits ready to go. And in fairness, if you're going to make a game where part of your sales point is having characters and outfits, having seasonal Christmas outfits is going to be on your short list of things to do. And you're doing a very high anime fashion style thing with one leg bare, one leg in a stocking, just mismatched, clear arm cuffs, and then yeah, a short skirt with a slit in it and cleavage, yep, and a Santa hat. So I'm sure that outfit will somewhat satisfy fans of Stellar Blade who are in it for the costumes and the outfits, which in fairness is probably the best reason to be a fan of Stellar Blade, is for the character design and the outfits. Nobody's really singing the praises of the gameplay or anything like that, as it is mostly just a Nier Automata ripoff. Not a terrible Nier Automata ripoff, but yeah. I don't know what people really could have expected though from Shift Up, when they're going from like Infinite Nike, not Infinite Nike, Goddess of Victory, I believe is their most recent mobile game, which is just a bunch of lewd anime girls in a gacha. And their first game, Destiny Child, was just a bunch of lewd anime waifus with a few husbandos added in too. And it was a gacha game. So yeah. It's crazy that they had the level of success that they even did with Stellar Blade, in that they were able to make a 3D platforming game at all. And since they had only made 2D simplistic gacha games before, very, very ambitious. And if there is going to be a new player from South Korea, Shift Up still has a high chance of being that new player, because they have Sony help fund the development of Stellar Blade. I don't know if Sony's going to fund the development of their next game, nor have I really heard of them announcing a new game, which I guess that would be my next expectation, is that they would announce something new. Probably shouldn't make a Stellar Blade game that is exactly the same, or a sequel. Probably should try something a little bit more ambitious, and try something that has a few more characters of note, instead of putting all the focus just on Eve like they did in Stellar Blade. Moving on, Gamatsu says Bendy Lone Wolf has been announced for all consoles, PC, iOS, and Android, which is basically everything. I'd assume that this is yet another game in the Bendy series, which I don't really know what the Bendy series is, but it does feel like it's been around for a while. Looking at this trailer, looks like you're playing on this parody of Goofy, running around hacking and slashing things. But yeah, guess something like that could work. Agatha Christie, Death on the Nile, has been announced for the PS5, Xbox Series, Switch, and PC. Which, yeah, there's been a previous Agatha Christie game that I do think they are going slightly better in the right direction as far as making these kinds of mystery games, but they kind of still suffer horribly by being a niche, and they suffer horribly by being based off of stories that most people who would play these games have already read. This is kind of a great example of how you can make cheaper games that still look good these days to tell those kinds of stories. But yeah. Noticeably, we have never really embraced the idea of just pure conversions of famous stories. Kids that have to read Romeo and Juliet, while they can watch movies based off of Romeo and Juliet and get most of it right and cheat that way, they can't play a game based off of Romeo and Juliet. If they could, it would be a visual novel, and it would very possibly be just word for word the play that Shakespeare wrote. But even that, if I was to search Steam for Romeo and Juliet, I probably wouldn't get anything that was particularly that good. And yeah, Shakespeare plays are public domain, and I know that there's one developer that makes a bunch of gay furry visual novels based off of Shakespeare plays, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend those games either. You definitely don't have any AA companies out there going, hey, let's just do this. And yeah, perhaps there is a bigger gap between something like Death on the Nile, which is a more recent story, and Romeo and Juliet, as far as how would you really convert that to a video game to make that work well. In both styles of games, though, I think the best way for people to pull that off is to have the player have to memorize all the lines of a play like Romeo and Juliet and spout it back, or perhaps even find hidden objects throughout the world to find the next line of the play. Yeah, if you were playing as Shakespeare and you were finding hidden pages of your play all throughout the game, that might be an interesting twist too. One of the shows I'm wasting my time on is Silo on Apple TV, and there was an interesting twist in that in one silo, Romeo and Juliet don't die at the end, and a specific line is not mentioned, whereas in a different silo, Romeo and Juliet do die at the end, which definitely makes it seem like there is something weirder afoot as far as how the silo's history has been rewritten. Let's see, moving on. Bleach Rebirth of Souls character trailer for Shigekuni Genryuasi Yamamoto. This was the head captain for the vast majority of Bleach until the 1,000-Year Blood arc, which he dies and gets replaced. But he basically never fights anybody before the 1,000 Years Blood arc, and so he is just this old man that is a question mark as far as why is he in charge, or is he as powerful as people seem to think, which definitely I guess would lean back into the idea of a fighting game where this guy should be way more powerful than a lot of the other characters. And his fight and the beginning, the first season of the 1,000-year blood arc, or the first part of it, at least had it where his fight went on for 3 or 4 episodes, whereas right now, the episodes that are airing on Hulu, it's like maybe 2 episodes a fight takes place, but very often it feels like 1 episode is the entirety of a fight. It just all feels very rushed, and it doesn't feel particularly interesting. You're not seeing the main protagonist fight for the vast majority of the time either. So yeah, there's a real problem, I think, going on with Bleach right now. Particularly just the feel of it and the pace of it. Moving on back to video games, Monster Hunter Wilds has a Welcome to Monster Hunter trailer presented by Daisy Ridley, which I guess is a narration, an actor. I feel like Daisy Ridley was, I mean, I don't think she's the actress from the Aliens movies. Ridley, I think, was the name of the character in the Aliens movies. It's interesting to have presented by somebody. That's a different twist. Yeah, how long is this video, though? 10 minutes? A 10-minute primer to Monster Hunter is probably needed. It's not like Daisy Ridley is showing up in the video, so it's not trying to promote her too much. And I would assume Monster Hunter Wilds is not the mobile game, because these graphics definitely don't look like the mobile game. There's something to be applauded in Monster Hunter, in that it definitely feels like they focus heavily on making the monsters feel good. Singular focus is almost certainly needed. Let's see, Bandai Namco is going to release a remastered Tales of titles fairly consistently. Which, okay, that's Bandai Namco just saying, hey, we're going to remaster a bunch of the Tales of games. Which, yeah, maybe that would make it a better argument to go and play the Tales of series if you haven't before, but I don't know if it makes a particularly good argument. And this may very well be a case of Bandai, like so many other Japanese game companies that once had successes in the past, just trying to double, triple, quadruple dip on old successes because they have no new good ideas, or they have no capability to make new good games, or they have no capability to make games that will actually sell by modern standards. Which, yeah, a lot of Japanese companies feel like they are living in the past. Honkai Star Rail Trailblazer Edition launches in January of 2025. The Blood of Dawnwalker reveal event is set for January 13th, 2025. Arknight's Infield third gameplay demonstration video is available. Arknight's, I think, is still really a mobile game, although this video doesn't really strike me as the same Arknight game. Is this a spin-off? Yeah, this looks different. First of all, this looks widescreen to me. Yeah, so maybe Arknight's Infield is its own separate game. It's an upcoming real-time 3D RPG with strategic gameplay elements. So it's not just Arknights, it's Arknight's Infield. Macho launches March 13. Is that Macho or Macho? I think you would pronounce that Macho. I think Macho would be without the T. Launching March 13th for the PS5 and PC, and then later for the Xbox Series. See a little bit of this gameplay demo. Okay. So you're running around 3D platforming, and instead of shooting people, which would be your default thought in these types of games, it is shooting different colored orbs, which in fairness probably does have more of that Splatoon type vibe, where it's more kid friendly. Looks like there might be extra challenges. It looks like there are different colored enemies. So it's taking color matching as a concept. So clearly this would not be a game for the colorblind. The fast motion would make that pretty impossible. And if you are playing against anybody else, I would have to assume you're playing for points on a leaderboard or something like that. Although it does feel like you could have two people playing at the same time against each other. That might get very chaotic fast. Yeah, not a terrible looking game. Weirdly, first time I've seen it though. Arknight's Infield PC beta test is set for mid-January 2025. Now, I know Arknights in the past has spent a lot of time promoting the original Arknights on like the Google Play Store. So, if it were a case that I thought that would really get me views, and if I was really just trying to get as many views as possible, Arknight's Infield on PC would be a game certainly to play if that's really where my heart was. But the reality of it is, it's just not going to be where my heart is. Plus, even though Arknights maybe promoted itself quite a bit, I'm not sure that led to a particularly happy fandom or a particularly large fandom. It may very well have just led them to having a lot of whales on their storefront. Looking at this trailer, it doesn't feel like it's particularly that interesting or that unique of a game story or world. Let's see. Hunter x Hunter Nin X Impact has a character trailer for Moro. If you want to check that out on Gamatsu. And then Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth Trilogy and Death End Request Code Z for Switch have been cancelled for the West. This has been updated. The contents do not comply with Nintendo's guidelines, which is weird because I feel like some, if not all, of these games individually have already been released on the Switch. But maybe not. Maybe there was something in Hyperdimension Neptune Rebirth Trilogy that hadn't been on the Switch, and you could see maybe Death End Request Code Z being a brand new game. Again, this is another case of where even slightly lewd games are getting censored out of existence by Nintendo and Sony. both of which are actually Japanese companies doing the censorship out of fear of just a growing conservatism from the ESRB in the West. In Japan, Hyperdimension Neptunia Rebirth for the Switch launched both physically and digitally on May 23rd, again highlighting how there are different standards for the Japanese release versus the Western release. Death End Request Code Z launched for the PS5, PS4, and Switch on September 19th in Japan. So yeah, censorship is growing, censorship is happening, and it is hurting the Western audience more than the Japanese audience at the moment, but eventually it will hurt the Japanese audience when they can't get enough sales to justify sequels. Idea Factory International representatives told Komatsu, although the Neptunia series and Death End Request series have prior entries on Western Switch eShops, we are informed that the contents of Rebirth Trilogy and Death End Request Code Z do not comply with Nintendo's guidelines. As a result, we are unable to release these titles physically or digitally for the Nintendo Switch. Yeah, and you would think that Nintendo wouldn't want a controversy right when they're about to announce a new console, but they clearly don't care. Yeah, and you could see even maybe a split here, and that Death End Request probably is a little bit more lewd than the Neptunia series is. Inherently, I would have to assume that Neptunia series is getting censored for maybe a bathing scene with a character who is underage. Maybe, or underage looking, or just characters in general looking moe, and being interpreted as being underage. Now, neither one of these games, I imagine, ever tried to be released on the Xbox in the West. They may very well come out on PC, but they may not come out on Steam. So, yeah. And so the censorship continues, with Idea Factory showing that the line is getting pushed quite a bit. I would have to also assume that Doug Bowser at Nintendo of America perhaps has some influence there too, because if it was really just a case that Nintendo of Japan allowed these games, then I don't see a reason why Nintendo of Japan would have told Nintendo of America to not allow them. Of course, this may be a whole lot of nothing. In a couple days, we may see that this gets reversed and the games do come out with no censorship or no changes being made, or perhaps there are some minimal changes being made. Then Virtua Fighter Revo launches January 28th, 2025 with an open beta test available now. And that's our last Gematsu article. The Horror Naobuchi Gaming on Linux articles. A horror scavenging game called Collectica is like Lethal Company, but an elevator wants to eat you. Interesting. Let's see that on Steam. These games aren't inherently like that old. Give that a chance. Little Rocket Lab is probably the cutest production line automation sim out there. Again, let's see how this looks. Probably at the point where I should make some new YouTube shorts. A chilly survival game called Black Forest, The Long Dark 2 has been announced. I suppose it is possible that my macro is opening all of these tabs, and then the tabs are just getting moved around. Palworld Faybreak major update launches December 23rd. Fabric, I would assume, means fairies. But yeah, I would assume that maybe that means that there's just going to be a fairy class of pals, or an evolution of the existing pals. It looks like it might be a little bit more shooter focused, a little less production line assembly focused. It's always nice to see more content being added to Palworld. The question is, are they just adding more content in the hopes of getting a bump in its player base, or are they actually working to a goal where Palworld is going to be a fully complete game at some point that people would really want to sorry, I'm reading here as far as the Nintendo lawsuit and all of that, which we really haven't heard any news. I'm losing momentum here. Ramble too much at the beginning, like always, and then lose energy at the end. Godot Engine's 2024 show reel shows a lot of fun stuff for open source game for the open source game engine made in Godot 2024. I think is worth looking at. So this gives us names of the games at the bottom, I think, which that's a ridiculous name, and then visuals that shows you the possibilities as far as what you can do. Yeah. And so far, what they've shown is that you have some people that have done really well with smaller ambitions as far as the games go. But so far, we haven't had really enough time in which somebody who was using either the Unity engine or Unreal engine would have been able to jump over to the Godot engine and make a hyper-realistic AAA looking game. And in fairness, there may just not be enough optimization there to do the kind of like hyper-realistic textures or ray tracing, path tracing, things like that that are required almost exclusively for AAA hyper-realistic games. So the hope would be this time next year when we see a collection of games like this is that you'll start to see a higher number and a higher level of quality of hyperrealism. Although that is a hope specifically for the Godot engine to show off what it can do, when in reality, as far as a gamer goes, all these games look pretty okay, and I don't really need games to be hyper-realistic. I need games to be interesting and have good gameplay mechanics. And yeah, the Godot engine seems more than capable of doing that. The number of enemies on screen for this game in particular is a good statement on the Godot engine. Here, somebody has added Scratch effectively to Godot as far as designing with blocks, which that's really a crutch I would imagine I would recommend people get into. Like, it's not going to help you in the long run. You're still going to need to know C++ or Rust if you want to get really wild as far as game development goes. Now this one looks interesting. It is also, I think, interesting how you have like assistive programs like this that are being made in Godot, since there's been such an increase in enthusiasm around it. It's sad though that none of these games actually help anything. That GD Tours, again, an assistive program. Yeah, I haven't heard about any of these games though. If I did see them, I saw them if they were released on Steam and thought of them as just a standard game, which might be the best praise you could possibly give to the Godot engine, is that people are making games with Godot and it doesn't come off looking different. Whereas RPG Maker, in sharp contrast to that, everything made in RPG Maker, or almost everything made in RPG Maker, looks like it was made in RPG Maker and looks like a low effort asset flip, where undoubtedly some of these games probably are flipping a few assets. I don't feel like any of them are really low effort. Fog Piercer. That's an interesting thought. A gamified version of something like Snowpiercer. Yeah, it seems like Godot engine here is highlighting almost every single game they can find. That has a lot of games they just showed. Yeah. And yeah, I would say there is room for a lot more games, and next year I would say, and room for a lot more higher quality games to be highlighted next year. That was a long thing. I would have thought there would have been more kart games too. But yeah, there's just a very long list here of games, none of which I recognize. I guess they all might link to someplace if I was just to click on them. It's still very much early days around the Godot engine, but I do think that we will potentially see a real competitor with the Godot engine compared to the closed source Unreal Engine, the closed source Unity engine, and then other proprietary, owned by one company engines like Capcom's RE engine. And it does say something that the two things I really wanted to click on there were GD Tours and the code blocking. Sorry, I'm trying to figure out why my phone's beeping, of my 2 or 3 phones. Hundreds of free tours, learn Godot with the largest base of free learning resources. We have everything you need to get started. Okay. There is a question certainly here as far as just how helpful would this be for somebody who barely knows programming to begin with, or is this really more coming down to you need to have a level of understanding on how to program games using things like Unreal or Unity first. Apparently they've been doing this for 7 years, which is really just a blink of the eye for programming language. And then block coding, intended as an educational tool for learners in early stages of their journey towards becoming game developers. This plugin lets you create your first games with high-level blocks, avoiding the immediate need to learn code in GD script, which, yeah, inherently you're going to have to relearn everything in GD script, which is its own thing, that you're going to then have to relearn everything in C++ if you need to do some lower level coding, which maybe you don't, depending on how simplistic the game is that you're making, maybe you don't need that low level of programming. Let's see what this looks like. This is a 10-minute video. Let's see if we can skip ahead to see what some block coding looks like. Problem here is that even at this, it's going to be very difficult to see anything and read anything. It's just too small. Yeah. But it does seem like they've got like a simplistic Pong function that is somewhat working. No, all this is really Scratch, which is an open source block programming language that I don't know if people should really be taught this. I don't think they should. I think it just makes this a completely different experience that feels completely weird to what you're going to be doing if you actually want to program an actual game in the future, which when you want to program an actual game in the future, you're going to have to type text, and dragging and dropping text is just not going to be a thing. Even if this text actually is the same old, it's just not the future of it. On the other hand, though, let me throw out a different concept and say, if you've got a 12-year-old who wants to be in programming and they're taking a programming class in school, they probably are going to be taught something simplistic like this, because the school is going to have to teach to the most simplistic students and try and get them all to graduate. They're not going to be teaching the most complicated stuff to the most complicated students. Which, yeah. So is there a way I can move while I'm zoomed in? No. Like there is. So all I can do is zoom out. So when you start, and this is kind of the problem with the programming concept that I ran into the one time I tried to program with this, is that you have blocks that are completely disconnected from other blocks, so they kind of just run at the beginning of the programs in parallel. Let's see. This feels like this is mostly just playing the sounds of the Pong, but not actually dealing with anything else. So yeah, to end my thought, this is probably something to think about if you were going to try to get kids specifically to focus on Godot and get used to Godot by backdooring them using block coding. This is under an MIT license, which should be fine, particularly for educational things. People in general shouldn't care too much about licenses. when educational use is involved, but probably isn't the worst idea to teach kids to be aware of copyrights and licenses from the beginning, so that they don't go down the path of thinking they can just copy and steal everything off the internet. Which, yeah. Moving on, for gaming on Linux, Linux Mint 22.1 beta with Cinnamon Desktop 6.4 and lots of Wayland improvements. Wayland does seem to be the future as far as how desktop windows are going to be rendered. I don't know, though, if Linux Mint is something that I can really recommend anymore. Not when you have Bakelite Linux, not when you're on the verge of having SteamOS. It just doesn't make a lot of sense. One thing about Bakelite Linux too is that it's effectively just always getting updated, which is something that certainly people have complained about as far as Windows constantly updating, but inherently an operating system that is just constantly getting updated in Linux has a chance of being just a better experience than Windows, because I don't think Bakelite Linux is going to get updated if things are horribly broken in the way that Windows updates tend to launch with horribly broken elements. Different Windows desktop operating system, XFCE 4.20, which apparently not going with the weed reference there, has experimental Wayland support. So notice how each of these updates are very much being centered around how far Wayland is getting and how far acceptance and embracing of Wayland is going, considering for decades X11 windowing has been the default and basically the only option that you would take. Let's see, the Windows compatibility layer of Wine version 10.0, second release candidate, is out now. Yeah. As I'm cleaning house, I'm finding some of my old CD-ROMs of things like Command & Conquer Tiberian War. And I don't really think that there's a reason for me to hold on to the CDs of the installers of those versions, though. Like, I could just play those games on Steam, and if I got really desperate, I could just download a torrent of those old games if I needed the installer disk. Most of these games don't have like old versions that you would specifically target anyways. Just playing the Steam newest version is more than good enough. Turok Origins has been announced, and it's now a third-person shooter with co-op. We already talked about that, although that does give me a excuse to let's just talk about the protagonist characters and see if any of them look interesting. No, not really. Let's see if the picture here. You've got a lady here in sci-fi armor. You've got what I think is a guy with a sword in sci-fi armor. And then you've got a guy with a bow in sci-fi armor. No, that looks particularly impressive, and it looks like you're going to be looking at the back of the head of most of the characters while you're playing anyways. So it definitely feels like they're not focused. Although it is noticeable that they seem to have less sci-fi armor in these screenshots than they do here. And yeah, that is a difference, I suppose. GE Proton 9-21 has been released for Linux and Steam Deck, bringing more Phoenix fixes. GE Proton, though, is the public version, community maintained version of Proton, not to be confused with the Valve proprietary version of Proton, which, yeah, you should ideally stick with Valve's official Proton on Steam unless you need specific fixes from GE Proton, is their recommendation. The Illuminati have returned in a massive Helldivers 2 update out now. Not sure if the Illuminati as a character existed in Helldivers universe before, but wouldn't be crazy for them to. The Helldivers universe being a multiplayer game, though, does leave me out. I would love for there to be a single player Helldivers experience that I could jump in there and just kind of have some of that fun, knowing I won't be having all of the fun that people playing against other people are having, and just kind of get the general storyline of it. Although I think for the most part we know that the general storyline isn't too different from that movie series based on a book series. I forget the name of the movie now, though, the one with the giant bugs. The Elden Ring Night Rain co-op spin-off has been announced. So that's a spin-off with co-op, which is an interesting thing. Corekeeper developer announced that Kaoria that looks suspiciously like Terraria, where every pixel is your shape. Yours to shape. Yeah, I don't feel like it's particularly too crazy to say there should be more rip-offs of things like Terraria, though. There should be more Minecraft rip-offs, and there should be more Terraria rip-offs, and each of those games are either going to be ignored because they are too much similar to games that already exist and people already have played, or they have to go in their own direction and do something differently. And particularly in the case of like Minecraft or Terraria, you do run into the situation where a resetting factor might not be a terrible thought, in that getting into Minecraft right now, while not particularly hard, is way more complicated than getting into Minecraft 10 years ago, where there was a lot less going on. So yeah, Valve may be working on a new kind of Steam machine. We still haven't gotten any real confirmation of any of that actually happening. And that'll bring us to GameDeveloper.com stories, but I think we probably talked about all these. The X-Marathon director Chris Barrett sues Sony and Bungie after an unfounded fire. Barrett alleges he was fired from Bungie without cause, and that it and Sony are withholding a $45 million employee payout from him. Interesting. It must be nice to get fired and then somehow be able to sue your employee, let alone sue them for $45 million. That certainly is rich people's problems there, whereas the vast majority of people around the world, if they were fired, would not have the ability to sue their boss because they wouldn't have any money in the first place, let alone have any chance of getting even $1 million. Yeah. There is, in my opinion, a great argument that you should be able to sue employees for inflicting undue pain and suffering on you, for harassment in general, and just being jerks. But if we started suing people for being jerks, then the lawsuits would never end. But yeah. And inherently, if there was a true social credit score around the world, not what China does, where people acting like jerks could have their score lowered by other people, then almost certainly every employer would have severely low social credit scores. Of course, China is a prime example of where that would never be the case. A factory worker who's making the factory as slave labor like as possible is going to have a very good social credit score as far as how China is concerned, because they just want the GDP of the country to go up. They don't care about the happiness of their citizens. Most countries do not care about the happiness of their citizens. But yeah, I guess this isn't really a David versus Goliath, but there's nothing wrong with the Goliath versus Goliath fight going on. So it'll be interesting to see if this goes anywhere. Let's see, the mobile dev Glow Up Games shuts down after a 5 years run. Let's see. Their mission was to build games and tech which centers and celebrates black and brown joy, and we were proud of what we were able to achieve, is the subheadline here. What games do they make? That's Insecure, the Come Up game, apparently was the only game worth mentioning. I guess that's what this is from. Yeah. That capitalism corrupts, obviously, and so we have yet to see a charity-based video game company that would potentially succeed through donations to make games to target their stated agenda. So until we get to that point, though, I imagine most of these companies are going to fail just because they're starting from the wrong perspective. Number one goal of any company is we've got to survive. We've got to pay our employees and keep them employed. And then second goal can be celebrating black and brown joy, which is a fine goal to have, although it cannot be a goal higher than making a game, making money and surviving as a company. And yeah, I think when you have people so focused on the wrong goal, it's no surprise that companies fail. But they did at least release one game, and they did run for 5 years. But yeah, I would say, unless your goal is to be a regular average game company that's going to do anything and everything to make as much money as possible, you need to be able to form your company as a charity, and you need to have angel investors, and you need to have consistent donations, because that extra support, that tax-free, tax-exempt status, all of that is going to be the thing that helps a more specialist, more charity-focused type of game development. Yeah, even other charities have not gotten into the realm of making games very often. I think PETA has made 2 or 3 games against eating animals or using animals that have ironically failed miserably because people play the games and like the games as far as the macabre artistry on them, instead of embracing the macabre artistry and embracing the idea of not eating animals or not using animals in the production of other materials. And so yeah, the couple of PETA games have, I think, backfired horribly. But I think that's really the only example I can recall that has even tried to make little mini games to spread their message. There is definitely room for one of the breast cancer societies to make a mini game that better shows how to do self-testing for breast cancer. Well, both men and women really should test themselves fairly consistently, and they don't know what they're looking for. And I think it's at least 60% of all lumps in breasts are overlooked and ignored, and that self-testing is very important, I think, because a lot of women, when they're young, are not willing to get into mammograms and do the x-rays. Plus, mammograms usually are only once a year, and if you find a lump, you want it treated within weeks, not within potentially 11 months from now. Same is true for men. Breast cancer is almost 50% in men as it is in women, and yet charities have pushed it to be a female-only problem. So yeah, there's room to make a mini game like that, and that would certainly catch people's attention. There is room, I imagine, for lots of other charities if you start to just go down the list of charities to figure out some kind of mini game they could do. We've seen a little bit of that of museums starting to make 3D interactive experiences of what their museums look like, and I think COVID helped push towards that. But yeah, that's about the only charities that have really embraced interactive video game like experiences. Moving on, Bolero, thank goodness you're here, wins I think those are 2 games, have won the Apple 2024 App Store Awards. I'm not sure how prestigious those awards really are, and I'm not sure how much really Apple cares, or iOS people, users care. Seems like a lot of these are going to be apps in general, not games. We've had very little follow-up as far as AFK Journey noticeably being ignored by GameDeveloper.com there. Yeah, no real follow-up from Google and Samsung working together for an augmented reality, yet another experience. It is definitely showing what the state of gaming is on MacBooks are, though that thank goodness you're here is a winner. It shows that you really are not going to be playing any AAA hyper-realistic games on a MacBook, and they don't really care to push that much. But yeah. Weirdly, even though I would say at least 50% of people do have iPhones, I don't think that has hurt the chances that the next generation of gamers would be as big as they are now, if not bigger. I just think eventually kids with iPhones are going to reject their parents' phones and move over to Apple phones. And people with Android phones, kids with Android phones, are going to reject those and go to iPhones, and maybe a little bit of vice versa there. But both sets of kids are all going to want some kind of gaming experience, whether it's via a console or whether it's PC gaming. And so life will find a way, and I imagine we will have a very strong gaming community. It still plays AAA games and isn't in any way just more about mobile gaming. If anything is really threatening the actual gaming community of people who actually play games, it's live streams and YouTubers and Twitch streamers and things like that, which that's a whole separate conversation. I think all of these stories from GameDeveloper.com are going to be old. New Monolith, Nintendo now owning Monolith story, no real follow-up there. Layoffs at Ziff Davis, layoffs at People Can Fly, new company. Yeah. And some of these stories are downright inaccurate for as just old as they're going to be. No follow-up on AI generated games. And there's just really no reason to go over these stories once again. That macro is totally broken. So let's go through all the games on Steam. We're 2 hours and 10 minutes in. I probably should never mention how long we're in. I don't think we'll be seeing those short 2-hour streams again for a while. Now, New Year comes around, maybe. I could see there being very few games released, very few bits of news. But yeah, I think it's going to be busy right up till the New Year. At least right up until the Christmas day. And yeah, as much as I dislike just the random change of schedule and change of what's on TV and change of what's happening during the Christmas season, I will say I can appreciate and did appreciate the Christmas day, next day after Christmas, and pretty much that whole week till New Year, because at that point the Christmas movies pretty much stopped by December 25th, and you're at that point you've opened your presents, you can start playing with them, and then you can just embrace the new of all of that. Tends to be less obligations at that point. Maybe a Christmas dinner. Then you just kind of have some, or at least I did, I had this kind of freedom to do what I actually wanted until basically New Year. Nor was I, as a kid, particularly expected to stay up till New Year or do anything that is more of a adults only thing. And yeah, perhaps it's a knee-jerk transition there, that you go from potentially having something that you had to do on December 24th to potentially being left to your own devices until January 1st. And for the most part, around any other part of the year, I would just be preferred to be left to my own devices. Some of these already have YouTube shorts made on them. Give this a chance. The biggest problem, certainly around the Christmas season, and it's almost exclusive to the Christmas season, is the first joviality around it. So if you're just not feeling full of joy, happiness and joy around Christmas, it just gets way worse on you. And inherently, a lot of people are going to have seasonal depressiveness to some extent, maybe just to a small extent, in the winter time. So this first forced joviality, forced happiness is doubly at the wrong time. It is inherently the suppression of the ability to express yourself really to any extent. It's just not a good system, and it's perhaps a system that is mostly just being enforced by randomness or tradition and momentum more than any one person. Of course, a lot of Christmas is going to be based on Christianity, and inherently every Christian church is going to be preaching just about the same thing for the entire month of December. So there's your main engine to enforce the idea of how people should feel and experience themselves. And that seems like way too many shorts, and I don't know what happened there. Like I have a lot of tabs here, and I just don't know how I could have gone through all of that. So I'm just going to go through it all again just to make sure I didn't somehow accidentally skip to the end. Yeah, I don't think... Yeah, I must have skipped to the end somehow. Or jumped around. Is this in English? Good thing I caught that. Here's one that's not in English. Shouldn't put all the blame, though, specifically on Christianity and churches, because certainly, while they may have been the starters of it, plenty of music, Mariah Carey, and movies also reinforced and evolved the concept of Christmas being one way and one way only, or being within a limited form. I would say particularly in school. When I was in school, while I was probably somewhat happy to be out of school during the Christmas break, I mean, I was also totally spent at that point too. It would have been half a year at that point where I've already dealt with a bunch of teachers and a bunch of homework and things, all things I definitely would not really want to play or deal with. I'm gonna say no to this. Just doesn't look quite polished enough. Same is going to be the case here. So yeah, I kind of needed a vacation of a week or two just before starting a vacation to deal with Christmas. Which inherently, yeah, the point there is I'm saying it felt like a chore because many Christmas seasons did feel like a chore when I was younger. Nowadays, I can revel in doing what I want to do and not have to hang up decorations or put up a Christmas tree or any of that nonsense that means nothing to me. Sure, if it means something to you, if you like to do it, by all means do it, but don't feel like you have to do it if you don't care. And inherently, I didn't care. I always found that decorating was one of the most wasteful activities, and that you're just putting something up to take it down in less than a month. It'd be different if you had just a year-round Christmas tree, Christmas decorations up. If you want to be one of those, I'll give you a pass as far as looking down on you for doing that, because that at least logically means, alright, you really enjoy this, you really want it to be that way. Ironically, I have quite a few Lego Christmas sets and effectively have a year-round Christmas village out of Legos. Not just because they are some of the better sets and they're visually attractive. Not really because I'm a fan of Christmas as much. I can't imagine you would have a large Lego village without having some of the Christmas sets, a lot of the Christmas sets, because they come out with a lot of them, certainly. I would say if you had every other Lego City set, and you can get the Lego City sets to look particularly good, but you had none of the Christmas sets, you'd still probably be only at a quarter of the size of what you could, or 3/4 of the size that you could be at. You would be missing out a lot, maybe even a third of the size you could get to. Assuming that's what you really want, is just as big of a Lego City as possible. Eventually you'll run out of room. Yeah, and I guess that's what's on my mind, because that's what I've been talking about today. This would have been a real nightmare. I feel like this is just the same game. It's already come out, but I'll give it a chance. I don't plan on really changing my schedule as far as streaming. So, yeah, however things line up, I will still stream the whole experience. Might be shorter if there's just not any new games out. There's room, certainly, for me to take a break and look at my chart and see if there's something there. Here's another one of these games that's lewd with should have been censored out. Should be in the adult section. Yeah, the irony there still is that if the kind of censorship we're seeing from Sony and Nintendo was tried to be applied to Valve more, there's a lot of complaining that could be made on how they're not really even applying their rules right now. That being said, start complaining, because it really is the case that that kind of censorship is also showing up in Valve. Meanwhile, the claims of Valve that the laws in Washington, D.C. state, no, Washington state, not Washington, D.C. state. There is no Washington, D.C. state. There's either Washington, the District of Columbia, which is not a state, or Washington state. Yeah, anyways, at least one employee at Valve that claims that the laws in Washington are different than as far as free speech and expressing yourself and how you can animate characters, whether they can be moe or not, seems to have never really come up to any kind of legal test or confirmation that those claims are even slightly true. So it rang hollow and untrue when it was originally said, and it still rings hollow and untrue sounding now, particularly considering how so many games have been improved. And so if there is a line, nobody seems to know what it is. And it does seem to be a line that is really just in the head of at least one Valve employee, but maybe multiple Valve employees. See. Still going through all these games. And that time, I think we did actually go through everything. Right about when I was running out of stuff to say. Yeah. As a much more reasonable number of tabs to be open, so I do think we have gone through it all. So yeah, anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.